My name is Melanie Cheung. I'm an abstract artist based in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And today's date is February 20th, 2025. So my cultural background is I'm half Chinese and half British, born and raised in Canada, so fully Canadian. And my father was born in Toronto, Canada, but his parents were immigrants from China. And my mom is from England and moved to Canada when she was a teen. Professionally and schooling-wise, my background is in fashion design. So I studied in university for 4 years to be a fashion designer. And I worked as a fashion designer for a few different fast fashion brands for 12 years in Montreal before really getting serious about creating art and really starting a consistent art practice. I've always been a creative person. I've always loved to draw and paint and make things, and obviously was designing clothes and sewing and pattern drafting as a big part of my life when I was in university and working professionally. But in terms of art, I really dabbled in a bunch of different styles and never really had a consistent practice until 2020, which was also the first time I really explored abstract painting. My fashion background influences my outlook on the world, as I really spent a lot of time studying trends. So not only was I a fashion designer, but I was also a trend forecaster at my last job. And so I spent a lot of time studying how societal influences also influenced fashion and color and the things that we wear, which I find super interesting. And I think on a more subconscious level, I bring this into my art as well. My art is very emotion driven, and a lot of times I'm exploring my own emotional feelings and what I'm going through, but I'm also really trying to tap into a collective mood or consciousness, something that I think is relatable to what a lot of other people are going through at the moment. And I'm also very aware of color and texture and subtle details. And I think that comes directly from my fashion background. And this also impacts my art as well. I think my art is very focused on color pairings and texture and subtleties. My cultural background impacts how I see the world as well, because I've always had a certain level of openness about the world around me and curiosity. And I think that maybe comes from having a mixed background and identity and not necessarily fitting into one box. So when I myself, in my own cultural background, have sort of so much to explore and so many differing ideas and cultural histories, I think it's just formed me into someone who has often felt just very curious about the world around me, and also kind of felt on the outside of a few different cultures, which has allowed me to spend a lot of time as an observer, which I think has also impacted just the idea that I want to create art and sort of impacted the actual art that I'm creating. I came to creating abstract art later in life, after a career that was very consuming, that got to a point that I was not really feeling inspired working in that medium anymore. And I think the fact that I consider my art career to have started later relates to my upbringing, because art was never something that was really necessarily encouraged as an actual career path or as something that should take up a lot of my time. My father has more of a traditional Chinese outlook on life and career. And so I really grew up thinking that, I should follow the traditional path of going to university and then making sure I get a good job out of university. And any sort of creative endeavors and passions could be hobbies and could be on the outside of my daily life. And I think just having such a consuming, busy career didn't really leave me with the time or energy to pursue what I really wanted to pursue, which were art and creative endeavors. Also, my work is very informed by my own internal introspection and just my interest in psychology. Having grown up as a very anxious child and person who is still anxious, I found myself often thinking about, just as a society, our own internal narratives and just how to connect with other people, and wondering sort of if other people were having similar struggles. So my work is very much an emotional dialogue, and every collection and every painting that I make really just explores themes that are sort of difficult to put into words, or that might be hidden, the idea that someone is going through something difficult or exciting or stressful, but there's no really real way of knowing what someone is going through. And really just exploring those unspoken parts of being human. All of those things really fascinate me a lot. I think based on going through my own struggles and just struggling to understand myself, it's really made me empathetic to others and curious about what other people are going through emotionally. So yeah, the majority of my themes that I explore through my painting have to do with subconscious thoughts or anxieties or dreams, or all of the sort of internal things that are hard to express even through words. I grew up in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, in an inner city neighborhood that was a real mix of people, cultures, incomes, ways of life, which I absolutely loved. It was definitely impactful and shaped very much who I am. I feel so grateful to have grown up in such a diverse setting, with getting to meet people from really all walks of life. And I think this has really shaped me as a person and also directly affects my art. I've always just been drawn to kind of the grittiness and rawness of a city. This is kind of where I feel most comfortable because that's how I grew up and what I know and what's familiar to me. And so I think through my work, I always really like to show raw elements, like raw canvas. I love a certain imperfection and raw, undone quality to my work. I never really want anything to look too polished. And I do think this comes from my upbringing and growing up in a city and getting to appreciate just the grittiness and the idea that, things weather and can be worn down, but still beautiful. My grandfather on my mother's side was definitely my biggest influence in terms of becoming interested in art. He himself was a very talented artist. He was a hobbyist painter who took a lot of art courses, primarily oil painting, and he did a lot of landscapes and still lifes and portraits. And he taught me a lot of basic skills in drawing and painting, and would always get me art books and encourage my creativity. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and both of them were very creative. My grandmother was really my fashion influence. She was an incredible sewer and just maker. So she taught me how to sew and really shared a common interest with me in fashion. And then my grandfather would always be setting up really fun art projects, whether it was painting or arts and crafts projects, or would be helping us make Halloween costumes and things like that. So he really always encouraged creativity in me and would take me to art museums and really just knew that I was interested in art and painting and creating, and always encouraged it and always tried to nurture that interest. In terms of influence in my painting style, I think my biggest influence would be Helen Frankenthaler, who I believe was one of the first people to develop the soak staining technique in painting, which was really unique and kind of not something you would see during her time. So I find that pretty amazing to be just sort of pioneering a new way of painting. And she may not have been the first, so I could be wrong about that, but it definitely wasn't common during her time of painting and practicing. In terms of current day influences, I've followed an artist named Heather Day for a long time, just through social media and through her website. And she was really one of the first modern current day painters that I saw doing this soak staining technique and using raw canvas and using it in such a bold way, and just seeing the way that she creates and the sort of joyfulness and focus on the materials and the process itself really inspired me to try and create in a similar way. Even though our work is different, I think just seeing that someone was painting in a way that felt sort of uninhibited and almost childlike was really inspiring to me, to see that that was even something that I could be allowed to do. Right now, I'm working on a new body of work, and I am focusing on bringing in more mixed media into my work. So mixing different textiles in, bringing in sewn elements, and kind of mixing my fashion design background with my art practice. I'm also trying to focus a little bit more on a minimalist approach. So some of my paintings, even though they are still sort of subtle overall, they were a little more maximalist in terms of colors and composition. And so I'm really just challenging myself to focus, for now anyway, on a more minimalist approach, which is quite a challenge for me. So that's my focus. It's not that I'm necessarily going to be only continuing forward in a minimalist way, but right now it's just a good challenge for me because I am constantly wanting to add more and more to my pieces. So I'm trying to see how my work could look if I just leave them a little more pared back. There are a lot of challenges that come with being an artist. I think keeping consistent with your practice and working through the many frustrations that pop up daily is difficult. So just being consistent and trusting the process, that's a daily practice, and it's definitely difficult. For me, self-criticism and self-doubt is another big challenge. So I think that also plays into just trusting the process and knowing that showing up daily and having a consistent practice is going to get me somewhere, even if I'm not necessarily happy with the work in the given moment. Also, now that I am pursuing art as a career, there are just so many business and marketing considerations that I feel I have to be on top of, and that are all huge challenges, not only to to try and learn all of these skills, but also just to be staying on top of all of the daily tasks that are involved. Things can just get really busy, and it always sort of feels like I'm behind in one area or another. My advice to my younger self would be to not get so down on myself for having so many ideas and wanting to try so many things. I think I would want to try all of these different creative ventures and hobbies and side projects when I was younger. I think ultimately because my career was not as fulfilling creatively as I hoped it would be. And then I would kind of just get worried or sort of down on myself that I was wasting my time, or that these sort of side hobbies or creative ventures weren't useful, or that I should focus more on one thing. And now that I am pursuing an art career and have a regular art practice, I'm realizing that all of these things that I did, even though they weren't necessarily related earlier on, have all become really useful, and I've learned a lot of necessary skills through all of those ventures. So that would be one piece of advice. I think another piece of advice would be just to try and stay consistent, even if I was working on all of these other things, to be consistent with some sort of art practice, whether it's daily drawing or painting or sketching, and to make things just for myself, not necessarily for the goal of showing other people or for giving to somebody else. Really just creating art for myself and for the pleasure of it, and to pursue it as a personal practice. I would have liked to have had a more consistent practice earlier in life. I think it's just helpful in a variety of ways, mentally, as well as just to grow as an artist. In terms of using unconventional mediums or techniques, I'm getting more into sewing and adding mixed textiles into my work, which I mentioned. I'm sort of trying to bring some elements from my past life as a fashion designer into my art practice. And so I've been mixing some textiles and adding some sewn elements into my paintings, sometimes cutting up previous works and sewing them back together. I also have ideas to try some more unconventional textiles and textiles from found and discarded items into my work. I haven't actually explored these ideas yet, but these are sort of future ideas that I really want to explore. I always listen to music when I paint. I listen to podcasts and audiobooks when I'm doing things like stretching canvases and priming canvases and all of the sort of non-painting things, non-creative things. I listen to podcasts and audiobooks kind of obsessively. And then I listen to music when I'm painting, and specifically music just because I find it really helps me get into sort of that flow state that is necessary for me to work. And really, I find a lot of inspiration in the music that I listen to. And so music is pretty essential to my painting practice. I think that painting in silence would be pretty torturous for me. I have done it before sometimes when maybe my phone's dying or I've forgotten my headphones. And I'm still getting to do what I love, which is painting. So it's better than not painting, but yeah, it's a little torturous to be just alone with my own thoughts. The best reaction someone has had to my artwork, well, I do have a really memorable reaction, which was when I had a collection of paintings that were on display at the Artist Project in Toronto. And this collection was all about dreams and subconscious thoughts. And someone who had a background as a scientific researcher came by my booth and told me that one of my paintings reminded him of the brain patterns during sleep paralysis, which I know nothing about. So that was really, I thought that was extremely cool just because it's sort of tied into my work in a way that I hadn't even thought about. So that was really interesting. I also generally really love when people say that they feel emotionally moved by my work, which is really the goal when I'm creating. I hope that people feel emotionally moved when they look at my work in a way that is difficult maybe for them to put into words. And I love having these conversations when people see my work and they sort of express this to me, because I think this is really why I paint and what I'm trying to express. I also am always trying to create a sense of calm when I'm painting. So if my work brings people calm, I'm also really happy with that outcome as well and that reaction. I will be showing a new body of work at the upcoming artist project in Toronto at the Better Living Centre, which is May 8th to 11th. And you can also find my work online through Tacit Collective, through the Art Gallery of Hamilton Sales and Services website, and in person there as well, and through ArtMatch, which is a Canadian online gallery as well. My social handles are at Melanie Cheung Studio on Instagram and on TikTok. Thank you so much.